Today is a good day to talk about baptism. And so we're going to look at the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. Have you ever thought what your life would be like if you didn't have access to Jesus? If there was no way to find out about him, to find out about the good news, to find out what God had done. And that could happen through a lot of ways. You might be born in a country that doesn't have access to Jesus, or a country that doesn't share Christianity or talk about it, that doesn't have churches. It might be that you grew up in a family that did not practice faith, did not see the relevance of it. And maybe you, and this may be you, maybe you drive by churches and go, what do those weirdos do every week? And of course we are a little weird, so there's that. But the point is, what would you do if you didn't have access to Jesus Christ? See, we should never take the good news for granted. We should never just look at it as this thing you do and it doesn't really impact your life, which is what a lot of people do. They get saved, so to speak, but it doesn't really change their life. It doesn't become the focus of their life. And so what happens then is we're taking the good news for granted, and we begin to do things like, or maybe we never stop doing things like our sinfulness. We never take it seriously. We never realize how serious it is that we have sin in our lives, that we do wrong things. And we spend our lives judging other people's sin and minimizing our own sin. Or we can't beat it in our own strength, and we can't beat it by some of the things that people have told us to do. So we just label ourselves with it and make it our identity, which is something that's actually very horrible, to just make your sin who you are, because it's not who you are. It's more like a disease that infects you and is killing you. And so the gospel's the answer for that. That's why the gospel's the good news. That's why it's called the good news about Jesus Christ. And so today, as we think about stepping into baptism today, as soon as possible, we need to celebrate the reality that Jesus came and he paid for our sinfulness and did for us what we could not do for ourselves, and made it possible for all of us to be free from our sinfulness, to peel off that identity of sin, that label we wear, and to walk in power and in victory. In Acts 8:27, it tells us the eunuch had gone to Jerusalem to worship, this man from Ethiopia. So if we skip down a few verses down to verse 31, after Philip confronts the man in the chariot, the official from Ethiopia, the man replies to Philip, he says, "How can I understand what I've read unless someone instructs me?" And he urged Philip to come up into the carriage and sit with him. See, this man is looking for God. He had a connection to God somehow through his heritage. It is believed by many historians and biblical scholars that the Queen of Sheba, when she went back to Ethiopia, that she took at least the messages of Judaism back with her, and so it had taken some root in Ethiopia. And so this guy had a faith, and he was coming to Jerusalem. He's the treasurer for the country, the land that he's a part of. So he's very important. Probably has an entourage, and he's coming to Jerusalem, and he wants to worship. Well, there's a problem. One, he's a foreigner, which isn't a huge problem, because the temple had an outer court, and that was for foreigners to come and learn about God. So there's always been this outreach to the world that was embedded even in Judaism. But the other issue is he's a eunuch. So something had been taken from him that was going to prevent him from entering into the temple. And that what had been taken from him was going to be obvious to those who guard the temple. So when he came to worship, either he knew before he got there, or he found out when he got there, that he wasn't getting in. Now, most people would have got mad at God, mad at whoever stopped them, what have you. But that's not what this fellow did. He's on his way back home. And I don't know what his worship looked like in Jerusalem. I guess there's no way of knowing. But he's on his way back home, and he's got a scroll of Isaiah, and he's reading that scroll. Now, that would have been incredibly expensive to acquire in that day and age. But nonetheless, rather than him getting angry and turning away from God and saying, well, this God isn't for me because I can't even get to him, he begins to search for God harder, more. And so to this guy, the good news that Philip's about to share with him is really good news, because before this, he doesn't have access to God through things completely out of his control. Now let's turn to Philip for a second. The Bible says in Acts 8:26, as for Philip, an angel of the Lord said to him, go down Go south down the desert road that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza. So sometimes we can't get to God. That was our first idea. The Ethiopian couldn't get to God. But when you can't get to God, God has this amazing, wonderful, radical habit of coming to you. And in this case, it was sending Philip to the Ethiopian eunuch. Now, Philip was in the middle of a revival in Samaria area. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it's pretty funny now. There was a big revival going on, and God comes to him in that moment and says, okay, I want you to leave this revival and I want you to go down this desert road. Now, that's amazing that Philip understood that when God calls you to do something, it must be really important, even especially when it doesn't make sense. And in this case, it was really important because he was about to touch the life of a man who was going to touch the life of a nation. And so he comes to the desert road and he shows up for the Ethiopian eunuch. And I want us to catch that. You look for God. You search for God. He shows up. If you're earnest in your search, a lot of people aren't earnest. They come to God and the first hint of trouble, they're out. As soon as someone hurts their feelings, as soon as church doesn't go the way we want it to go, as soon as some Christian disappoints their expectations, they're out. But not this guy. He'd actually waded through, most likely, a lot of rejection, but was still pressing into God. So when you can't get to God, he comes to you. And that coming to you can be a person, can be a song, can be something that you see and inspires you in the world. It can be a lot of ways that God can show up and basically say, I'm here. I care about you and I love you. So when Philip shows up, the guy is reading out of Isaiah. He's reading the passage that says, he was led like a sheep to the slaughter. As a lamb is silent before his shearers, he does not open his mouth. He was humiliated and received no justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. So the guy's question is, who is this guy? This guy who's silent, who's enduring suffering, who's innocent. And this opens the door for Philip to share the gospel. What's the gospel? Primarily it's Jesus. It's Jesus demonstrating what God is like. In Hebrews 1:3, the Bible teaches us that Jesus the Son radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God. So you want to know what God is like? Well, then you look at Jesus and you find out what Jesus is like. And that teaches us who God is. And so for this Ethiopian, he's trying to understand who this text is about. In Isaiah, it's about Jesus, and Philip begins to tell him the good news about Jesus, that Jesus came, lived, died, and lived again for him. That's the good news. There is access to God, and it's through Jesus, who is the representation of who God really is. We can't get to God on our own. We can't overcome our sin. We can't just peel off our own label, whatever identity we have slapped on ourselves. But Jesus paid it all. Jesus has overcome our sin. Jesus' blood washes off all the labels. The Bible says in Corinthians 5:21, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. This is important. This is your opportunity. That's why today's the day to enter into following Jesus, to step into discipleship through baptism, because it's so good. The reality is so good. This is an opportunity today, yes, to gather with other believers, yes, to worship. But mainly it's an opportunity to say, I follow Jesus. I have access to God through Jesus. And as long as I deny Jesus, I deny myself access to God. But Jesus has come. He's given us access. Today is our opportunity to come to God. And it may be, if you're a follower of Jesus already, it may be your opportunity to show up for someone else like Philip showed up for the Ethiopian eunuch. I hope that this has blessed you, and I hope that you claim your today. Have a great one. I'll see you soon.